The first stone caught her on the shoulder. Juno did not stop walking. The second struck the back of her head, just above the nape, hard enough to split skin. She felt the warmth of blood threading down into her collar, soaking into the fabric of the plain traveling cloak she had chosen deliberately. Not the embroidered silk she wore in the Alpha's hall, not the gold-buttoned wool that made servants lower their eyes when she passed, but something simple. Something that would not slow her down. It did not matter. They had recognized her anyway. Traitor. The word came first, the way it always did with crowds, one voice finding its courage before the rest followed. By the time Juno reached the midpoint of the market road, the stalls had emptied on either side. Vendors who had been arranging cabbages and dried fish and bolts of linen now stood at the edges of their stalls, watching. Children had stopped their running. Even the dogs had gone still. She's leaving him. A woman's voice shaking with outrage. She's actually leaving him. I knew it, a man called from somewhere to the left. I knew the moment his gold stopped flowing she'd find her feet. Another stone. This one from a boy no older than 10, who threw it with the practiced ease of someone who had already decided she deserved it. It glanced off her forearm. Juno adjusted the strap of the supply pack on her shoulder and kept moving. The gate was 50 yards ahead. She counted her steps the way she had learned to count everything in this pack. Quietly, privately, in the space behind her eyes where no one was invited. Alpha Kalen was dying and his Luna walks away from him. The voice belonged to Sarah, the baker's wife, a woman who had never once looked Juno in the eye during any of the 5 years she had been Luna, but who now had no difficulty finding her face in a crowd to scream at it. What kind of mate abandons her dying husband? The kind, Juno thought, who knows exactly what she is walking toward. She said nothing. The gate was 30 yards away now. The crowd had thickened at the narrow end of the road, pressing in from both sides, close enough that she could smell them. Bread and sweat and fury. That particular fury that only comes when a group of people who have quietly resented someone for a long time finally find a reason they can shout out loud. Someone grabbed the edge of her cloak. She turned just enough to look at the hand, a man middle-aged, broad through the chest. His face was twisted into something that had started as grief for the Alpha and curdled into something uglier on the walk here. "You don't leave," he said. "Not now, not while he's—" "Let go of my cloak," Juno said. Her voice was quiet. It was always quiet. That was the thing people never understood about her. They confused quiet with cold, and cold with empty, and empty with not caring. She had let them. It was easier. The man let go. She walked through the gate. Behind her, the curses continued long after she had passed beyond earshot, carrying down the hillside on the morning wind like something that had been waiting a long time to be said. She did not look back. Looking back was not something she could afford today. The road ahead was long. She had always known it would come to this. 5 years earlier, Juno had arrived at Kalen's pack as a stranger wearing expensive silk, not because she was trying to make a statement, because expensive silk was what she wore. It was what she had always worn. Not from vanity, though the pack had decided vanity was the simpler explanation and stayed with it, but because beauty had been the first language Juno ever learned to speak fluently. Her mother had taught her that a woman who controlled how she appeared controlled the first impression people formed of her. And the first impression, her mother said, was the one that survived longest. Her mother had been right about most things. The pack had made their assessment of Juno within the first week and held it like a fixed star for 5 years running. She spent the Alpha's coin on expensive gowns. She sat at the high table in earrings worth more than a family's monthly provisions. She carried herself through the corridors with a posture so controlled it, read as arrogance to everyone who did not know what it cost to maintain. What they did not see, what she made certain they did not see, was everything else. They called her decorative. They never saw her rising before dawn to balance grain stores that kept children fed through winter. They never saw the letters she wrote to distant merchants when supplies ran thin. They never saw the healer bills she quietly paid herself. They only saw the silk. Kalen saw it all. Kalen had always known. and that had been enough for her. "Let them see," he had told her once, sitting across from her in the private garden behind the Alpha's chambers, his long legs stretched out before him, watching her with that particular expression he wore when he was about to say something she was going to argue with. "Let them understand what you do. Why hide it?" "I'm not hiding anything," Juno had said. "I'm simply not performing it." "There is a difference between performance and communication, Juno." "There is," she had agreed. "And the people will eat whether they know my name or not." He had shaken his head. He had always shaken his head at that answer, and she had always given it anyway, because it was true, and truth was the only currency she trusted. What the pack thought of her, that she was wasteful, decorative, a beautiful inconvenience attached to their Alpha, it stung in the small hours, before dawn when the world was quiet enough to let things sting, but it did not change what she did. It did not change who she was. She could live with being misunderstood. She could not have lived with being the kind of woman who needed applause to do the right thing. What she could not live without was Kaelin. This was the truth she had never said aloud to anyone, not even to him, because some things were too large and too essential to survive being spoken. His love for her was the one anchor in a life that had otherwise taught her that belonging was temporary and warmth was conditional. He had looked at her from the first day without the assessing quality she had grown accustomed to in other men's eyes, without tallying her worth or calculating her utility. He had simply looked at her as though she were already exactly what he needed, and the steadiness of that gaze had undone her in ways she was still quietly recovering from 5 years later. When he became sick, it happened without warning the way serious things always do. One morning he was at the training grounds with his warriors, and by evening he was shivering in their bed with a fever that did not break. The pack healers came first, then the traveling physicians Juno sent for from 4 territories away, then the herbalists, then a specialist from the eastern mountain clans who charged 3 times what any healer had ever cost and produced results that lasted exactly 4 days before the fever returned, darker and deeper than before. For a year, Juno sat beside him. Not always visibly, she continued to dress, to appear at the high table, to maintain the face of a Luna whose pack was not fracturing under the weight of its Alpha's illness, because a pack needed stability more than it needed her grief, and she understood this. But in the hours that were hers, she was at his side, reading reports aloud to him when he was lucid enough to listen, holding water to his lips when he was not, changing the compress on his forehead in the middle of the night without calling for a servant, because some things she needed to do with her own hands. The pack did not see any of this either. What they saw was their Luna maintaining her appearance with apparent indifference while their Alpha wasted in his bed. What they said to each other in the market and the tavern and the space between stalls grew darker as the year wore on. She heard fragments of it sometimes, the word heartless most often, and sometimes cursed, because packs, when they are frightened, reach for someone to blame, and she had always been the easier target than the illness itself. It was Rowan who came to her on the night the senior healer drew him aside and said there was nothing left to try. Kaelin's beta had never liked her. He was not subtle about it and had never tried to be, a blunt, capable man who had served beside Kaelin since boyhood and viewed Juno's presence in his Alpha's life with the specific displeasure of someone who believes the people they love deserve better, and is too loyal to say so directly. He came to her chambers after midnight, knocked once, and when she opened the door, stood in the frame with the look of a man who has just made a decision he already regrets. "There is something," he said, without preamble. "I don't recommend it." She stepped back from the door. He entered. He told her about the witch on the mountain, a woman who lived at the far edge of the territory in a place the pack's law considered outside its protection and outside its permission. Forbidden territory, not because of the distance, but because of what had been practiced there. He had heard the stories the same way everyone had, passed hand to hand like contraband, that she could heal what healers could not, that the price she asked was never predictable, that people who sought her came back changed in ways that couldn't always be seen. "I'm telling you this," Rowan said carefully. Because I have run out of other options to tell you. Juno looked at him. You think I won't go? Something shifted in his face, a flicker of discomfort, quickly reassembled into his usual bluntness. I think you'll weigh the cost of it against the inconvenience to yourself, and find the scales don't balance. She held his gaze for a long moment. I'll go, she said. Luna. I would trade my life for his, she said, and her voice did not waver, did not perform itself. It was simply the flattest and most accurate statement she had made in years. If that's what she asks, then that is what she gets. The pack has never loved me, Rowan. At least this way, I give them something worth keeping. Rowan went very still. The silence in the room changed quality, became something heavier, something that required sitting down with, though neither of them moved. I may have, he started and stopped. Tried again. I may have misjudged you. It doesn't matter, Juno said. It does. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change what I'm going to do. She turned from him and moved toward the window, looking out over the pack grounds that lay quiet in the dark. There is one thing I need from you. She felt him waiting. Tell no one, she said. Not where I've gone, not why, not the pack, not Kaelin if he recovers. She paused, especially not Kaelin. Rowan's voice came careful and slow. If you simply disappear while he lies dying, they will say you abandoned him. Yes, she said. They will. They'll call you a gold digger, a traitor. I know what they'll say. She turned back to face him. If Kaelin recovers and learns I traded myself for his life, he will never forgive himself. That guilt will follow him into every decision he makes, every morning he wakes, every time he looks at the Alpha's chair. I won't do that to him. I won't be the weight he has to govern under. Her jaw set. He needs to rule freely, with his whole self, not half of it carrying the knowledge of what I did. Rowan looked at her for a long time. Then slowly, with a deliberateness that seemed to cost him something. Rowan, who had stood beside Kaelin in battles and never bent his knee to anyone, he knelt. It was not a small gesture. From him, it was enormous. I will carry your secret, he said, his voice rough, for as long as I draw breath. Juno pressed her lips together. She would not cry in front of him. See it as a duty to the pack, she said, because she needed to give it a shape he could hold on to. I see it as a duty to my Luna, he said, which is something I should have seen much sooner. She had no answer for that, so she simply nodded, and he stood, and they did not speak of feelings again. She left at dawn. She had not slept. There was no version of sleep available to her that night, so she sat in the chair beside the window and watched the sky change from black to deep, blue to the tentative gray of early morning, and then she rose, fastened the clasp on her traveling cloak, and picked up the pack Rowan had left outside her door. She did not take her silk, she did not take her earrings. She took provisions, a blade, and the single small thing she allowed herself, a piece of ribbon, dark green. The color Kaelin had once said made her eyes look like deep water. She tucked it into her breast pocket and left. The market was already busy when she passed through it. Someone had seen her leave the Alpha's wing. Word had traveled the way words always traveled in a pack, at twice the speed of any horse and with none of the accuracy. By the time she reached the midpoint of the market road, they already knew she was leaving. By the time the first voice called out, they had already decided why. The stones came after the words. She walked through all of it. The cursing, the spitting, the accusations that stripped 5 years of quiet service down to nothing and rebuilt her in the image they had always preferred, the image of a woman who took and never gave, who wore her beauty like armor against the people around her. She walked through all of it, and she did not speak, did not defend herself, did not look back. The gate opened before her. She walked through it. Behind her, the pack's voices rose into the morning air like something finally set free, and she understood distantly that this was the sound of people who had needed a reason to hate her and had found one at last. Ahead of her lay the mountain. She walked for 3 days. The road became a path, and the path became a track, and the track became nothing at all. Just rock and thin grass and the wind coming down from the peaks, sharp with cold and the smell of high places. Her shoes, which had not been made for this kind of ground, wore through at the heel by the second day. She wrapped the wound with a strip torn from her cloak and kept moving. On the third day, she found the cave. It was larger than she had expected, set into the mountain's face at a point where the rock jutted outward like a brow. Firelight moved inside it, warm against the gray stone. She paused at the entrance, breathing hard from the final climb, and called out. "I'm looking for the healer," she said. "I mean no harm. I know what you mean." The voice from inside was young, startlingly young, not the ancient croak she had prepared for, but something clear and even, faintly amused. "Come in, Luna." Juno stepped inside. The woman sitting beside the fire was perhaps her own age, perhaps younger. She was beautiful in the sharp, undecorated way of people who have never needed anything to amplify what they already are. She looked up at Juno with eyes that held the particular quality of someone who has seen a great many things arrive at her door and has learned to read each one at a glance. "I wondered when you'd come," the witch said. Juno stared at her. "I expected someone older," she said finally. "Everyone does." The witch tilted her head. "Sit down, virtuous woman. You've walked 3 days and your heel is bleeding through your wrapping." Something moved across her face, not quite warmth, but its closest neighbor. "You are greatly hated by your own people. I have seen it." Her eyes did not leave Juno's face. "And yet here you stand, doing what is forbidden for the very people who threw stones at your back." Juno sat. "I'm not doing it for them," she said. "I'm doing it for Kaelin." The witch looked at her, and something in her expression shifted, became something that Juno could not yet read, something that lived between pity and the first reluctant edges of belief. She leaned forward. "Then let me tell you," she said quietly, "what love once cost me." And the fire crackled, and the mountain wind pressed against the cave mouth, and outside, somewhere far below, the pack went on hating the woman who had just walked away from everything to save the man they were mourning. They did not know yet what they had let walk out their gate. They would. The witch's name was Sable. She did not offer it immediately. She offered tea first, something dark and bitter that smelled of pine resin, and something sweeter underneath, and Juno drank it without asking what was in it, because she had walked 3 days to get here, and her body needed something warm more than her. Caution needed to be performed. Sable watched her drink. "You expected an old woman," she said. "Yes," Juno said. "Everyone does." Sable took her own cup and settled back against the cave wall, drawing her knees up, studying Juno with eyes that held the particular quality of someone who has seen a great many things arrive at her door, and learned to read each one before it had finished walking in. The stories always make witches old. It's more comfortable that way, easier to fear something ancient than something your own age. "I'm not afraid of you," Juno said. "No," Sable agreed. "That's the first interesting thing about you." She tilted her head. "The second is that you came at all. You are greatly hated by your own people." Her eyes did not move from Juno's face, and yet here you sit, doing the forbidden thing for the very pack that threw rocks at your back. "I'm not doing it for them," Juno said. "No, I'm doing it for Kaelin." Sable looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not warmth exactly, but the memory of it, the shape left behind after warmth has been burned away. "Men," she said, "are not worth this." "Mine is," Juno said. Sable's mouth curved, but it was not a kind expression. "You sound very certain." "I am." "Then you are either very fortunate," Sable said, "or very foolish. And in my experience, those two things are harder to tell apart than people believe." She set her cup down on the flat stone beside her. "Before I tell you what I can do and what it will cost you, I want to tell you something else. Something you should hear before you make any decisions in this cave." Juno waited. Sable looked into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was even and unhurried, the voice of someone who has rehearsed nothing, because the story has simply become part of the structure of who they are. "I was married once," she said. "Not here. Far from here, a territory 3 days ride east before the mountain pass. My husband was a powerful man, a leader. The kind of man people follow without being asked, because something in him simply commands it." A pause. "I loved him the way you love yours, completely, past the point of sense." The fire shifted. Juno did not move. "He was cursed in battle," Sp continued. "A rival, Someone who couldn't defeat him by ordinary means found someone like me to do it instead. The curse was designed to kill slowly, to take months. Her jaw set. I watched him deteriorate the way you have watched yours. I sat beside him through the nights. I sent for every healer, every physician, every person who claimed to know something about what had been done to him. She looked at the fire. None of them could touch it. Because it was magic, Juno said quietly. Because it was as magic, Sable agreed. And I was the only one in that territory who carried magic of my own. I had kept it hidden. For years, I had kept it hidden because I knew what they did to women like me in places like that. I had built an entire life around the concealment of it. She paused. But I could not watch him die. The cave was very quiet. I healed him, Sable said. I used everything I had. It took 3 days. And when it was finished, I could barely stand, but he was alive. He sat up in that bed and he breathed, and I thought. She stopped. The pause lasted several seconds. I thought that would be enough. That love would be enough. That what I had done would matter more than what I was. Juno was very still. His council saw what I did, Sable said. They told him, and he. Another pause, this one with a different quality. Harder. He called me before them. He stood in front of his councils and his court, and he said that he loved me, and because he loved me, he would not do what the council asked, which was to have me killed. Her voice did not change its register. It simply continued flat and precise as a record being read. Instead, he banished me. From the territory, from his life. He said it was mercy. Juno pressed her lips together. He took another wife within the year, Sable said. I watched from a distance, the way you can watch things when you have certain abilities. I watched him build a life, with someone else in the home I had kept for him. In the bed I had sat beside for 3 months. She picked up her cup again, though it was empty. I have hated myself since then for not doing it differently. For saving him at all. For being the kind of woman who loved something more than she valued her own survival. The fire crackled. Juno looked at her. I'm sorry, she said. What was done to you was wrong. Sable looked back at her. Yes, she said, it was, and it will happen to you. It won't, Juno said. Sable made a sound that fell just short of a laugh. You sound very sure. Kellen is not like your mate. All men are like my mate, Sable said. When it comes to this, when comfort and love stand on opposite sides of a choice, they choose comfort, every time. They dress it in other words, duty, responsibility, what's best for everyone. But it is always comfort. Juno met her eyes. Kalen is a good man and he loves me. Not because I haven't seen his faults. I have seen all of them, and he has seen mine. But what we have built between us is real. I am not saving his life so that he will love me. I am saving his life because he already does, and because he is a good alpha and his people need him. She paused. I'm not doing this for a return. I'm doing it because it's right. Sable stared at her. The stare lasted long enough to become something other than evaluation, something closer to wonder, though it wore wonder's expression uneasily, like clothing borrowed from someone else. Love, Sable said finally, makes everyone weak, or strong enough to walk 3 days with a bleeding heel, Juno said quietly. Something shifted in Sable's face, not softening. She was not a woman who softened easily, and Juno did not expect it. But something opened, fractionally, like a window that has been painted shut for a long time and has found, against its inclination, that it can still move. She looked at Juno for another long moment. Then she said, He is inflicted with a rare curse, one I have seen only twice before. He is fortunate, more fortunate than he knows, to have survived this long. She paused. I can heal him. Juno exhaled, a slow, controlled release. Tell me the price. I'll tell you when I decide it, Sable said. First, you serve me, and I will decide when your service has earned his healing. The service lasted a month. Sable stripped everything from her systematically and without apology. The silk, the softness, the rhythms of a life built around beauty and comfort. Juno fetched water from the stream at the mountain's base each morning, 40 minutes down and 40 minutes back, the vessel heavy enough to leave her shoulders aching into the following day. She scrubbed the cave floor with a brush worn to almost nothing. She skinned whatever the traps had caught, dressed the meat with her hands, cooked over the fire, carried ash to the mountainside in the cold wind that came off the peaks in the early hours before dawn. She did not complain. Sable watched her the way she seemed to watch everything. Carefully, from a slight distance, as though Juno were an equation she was working through. On the 7th day, she told Juno that the sleeping mat was needed for other purposes, and she would have to use the stone floor. Juno moved to the floor without comment, and slept better than she had in a year. On the 14th day, Sable said, while Juno was working ash into the floor cracks, "Your pack is probably relieved you're gone. Less drain on the treasury." "Probably," Juno said, and kept working. "That doesn't anger you." "Some true things are painful," Juno said. "That doesn't make me angry. It just makes them true." Sable said nothing, but the silence changed quality, became something Juno filed away and did not comment on. On the 19th day, Sable attempted a different approach. She stood over Juno while she was on her knees scrubbing and said, with the particular precision of someone who has identified a structural weakness and is pressing on it directly, "You know that when you return, they will want you executed, the council. They will say you abandoned your mate. They will dress it in law and call it justice." Juno sat back on her heels, looked up at Sable. "Yes," she said, and I'll face it," Juno said. Sable had clearly expected the mention of execution to produce either fear or a demand for protection. Something Juno could be accused of wanting, from a position of Luna's authority, something that would expose a calculation underneath the apparent selflessness. The simple acceptance of it produced instead a long silence. "You're either very brave," Sable said, "or you have no imagination." "My imagination is excellent," Juno said, and went back to scrubbing. On the 31st day, Sable told her to stop working and sit down. Juno set the brush against the wall and sat. "I'll heal him," Sable said. The relief moved through Juno like water through dry ground, deep, total, reaching every parched place at once. She pressed her hands flat against her knees and breathed through it without letting it show more than it had. "The price," she said. Sable looked at her steadily. Something in her expression had changed over the month. Not softened, exactly, but cleared, the way a sky clears after prolonged weather. "I considered asking for your life," she said. "But a dead woman proves nothing." She paused. "I want to prove something." Juno waited. "Your mate will be healed," Sable said. "But I will take something from him first, not his life. His memory of you, specifically. Every good memory, every moment that built the love between you. What will remain is only what his counsel has told him. Every accusation, every rumor, every stone." She held Juno's gaze. "He will wake knowing you only as the pack has always described you." The cave was absolutely quiet. "If he condemns you in that state," Sable continued, "his sickness returns, and this time it will finish what it started." She paused. "But if the love he carries for you lives somewhere deeper than memory, if it is real enough to survive the loss of every reason he was given to, feel it, he will fight for you, even not knowing why. And if he does, the curse lifts, permanently. Everything returns." Juno sat with this. "You must not tell him," Sable said. "You must not guide him or force his hand, or give him any reason beyond what he finds himself. He must come to it alone." Her voice dropped slightly. "That is the only result that will mean anything, to either of us." Juno looked at her, at this woman who had loved completely and been answered with banishment, who had built her entire world around the proof that love was insufficient, who was, underneath all of it, still waiting to be wrong. "All right," Juno said. Sable blinked. "You agree?" "If his love is real, it will find its way back," Juno said. "I have to believe that. If I don't believe that, then none of what I've done in the last month means anything." She met Sable's eyes. "And if I'm wrong?" She stopped. "Let the silence hold the rest." "Then you'll have your answer," Sable said softly. "Yes," Juno said. "I'll have my answer." Something moved across Sable's face, the expression of someone who has been holding a door shut for a very long time and has felt, for the first time, it move slightly on its hinges. She said nothing else. She simply stood and turned to the fire and began. Juno came back through the gate on a Thursday morning. No stones this time. The news of Kaelin's recovery had reached the market the day before, and the pack's attention had shifted toward the new development the way it always shifted. completely, leaving the old grievance temporarily unattended. But the looks followed her through the streets like a second shadow. The specific weight of a crowd watching someone they have already condemned walk freely among them. Not yet sure what to do about it. The council had convened by the time she reached the Alpha's hall. She had not changed her clothing. She arrived in the plain traveling cloak, her hair unwashed, her heels still wrapped in torn fabric. She was aware of how she looked. She straightened her spine and walked in. Kalen sat at the head of the table. He was thinner than she remembered. The illness had taken something recovery hadn't yet returned. But he was upright, his color back, his eyes clear. She had spent a year watching those eyes go glassy with fever. The sight of them clear and focused moved through her in a way she absorbed and did not display. He looked at her. She looked back. There was nothing in his face that she recognized. Not the warmth, not the private acknowledgement that passes between two people who share a life. He looked at her the way he might look at a stranger brought for judgment, which was, she supposed, exactly what she was to him now. Edric rose. Luna Juno, you stand accused of abandoning your mate during his gravest hour. Returning only after his recovery placed you at no personal risk. He paused. What do you say? The hall was silent. Rowan sat at the far end of the table, his face a controlled blank, his eyes finding hers for a fraction of a second before returning to the table's surface. Nothing, Juno said. Edric frowned. Nothing? I have nothing to say. She turned her gaze to Kalen. Do what your mind tells you is right. Something moved through Kalen's expression, not recognition, but its outline. The shape of something trying to surface. 2 weeks, Kalen said. The room shifted. My Alpha. I was unconscious for the better part of a year. His voice was patient and immovable. I intend to understand what occurred before I pass judgment on anyone. He looked at Edric. Is there an objection? The Luna is a beautiful woman, another council member said, letting the implication carry the sentence. Kalen turned toward him. The look was enough. 2 weeks, he said, for the third time, and it was not a request. Rowan found her that evening in the corridor outside her chambers. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a month without setting it down. Tell me you're going to explain it to him, he said, without greeting. You know I can't, Juno. Her name and his voice had a different quality than it used to, rougher, more careful, the way people say the names of things they have learned to value belatedly. I know what you did. I know that what happened on that mountain is the reason he is standing at the head of that table. If he condemns you, then we'll have our answer, she said quietly. The witch cursed his memory. That isn't a fair test. He can't remember what he felt for you. He can't remember the specific moments, Juno said. But love isn't stored in memories, Rowan. If it were, it wouldn't be worth much. She looked at him steadily. If what we had was real, it lives somewhere she couldn't reach. I have to believe that. And if you're wrong? She held his gaze. Then I was wrong about the only thing that mattered to me, and at least I'll know. He was quiet for a long moment. You're either the bravest person I've ever known, he said finally, or the most stubborn. They look the same from the inside, she said, and went into her chambers. He came that night. 3 measured knocks, with a pause before the third. He didn't know he still did it that way. She opened the door. He stood in the corridor in a plain shirt, no Alpha's formality, and looked at her with those clear eyes that held none of their history and all of his natural directness. May I come in? She stepped back. He sat in the chair beside the window, the same chair he had always chosen, and said, I don't remember you. I want you to know I understand that's not a small thing to say. I know, she said. The council's reports tell me one version of you, he said. I find I don't fully trust it. When an entire group of people agrees completely on a single account of someone, that tells me more about the group than the person. He looked at her. I won't judge you on what others have decided to believe. Something moved in Juno's chest that she could not afford to name. Thank you, she said. It was all she could give him tonight. He nodded, stewed. At the door, he paused. I'll find my way to understanding what happened. I'm not known for leaving things unresolved. After he left, she pressed her hand flat against her sternum, against the ribbon tucked there. dark green, the color of deep water, and breathed. She returned to her silk the next morning, her gowns, her gold-buttoned wool, her earrings. She put it all on the way she always had, not for the pack, not for the council, not for anyone but herself, because this was her first language, and she would not be shamed out of it. Kaelin found her in the garden on the third day. He sat beside her without asking and looked at her gown, deep amber, embroidered in gold thread, and said, "The council must hate that." Juno laughed. The laugh escaped before she could stop it, sudden and genuine, because those were almost exactly the words he had said 18 months ago in this same garden, and the accuracy of it. The fact that even stripped of every memory he had arrived at the same sentence, moved through her in a way she could not explain. "They do," she said when she had collected herself. "Good," he said. He leaned back and looked out at the garden. No one should be judged for how they dress, only for what they carry inside. She looked at him carefully. "When you look at me, what do you see?" He considered this with the seriousness he gave everything. A woman who has not once asked me to decide in her favor, who has not argued her own innocence or performed it. He met her eyes, who, from everything I can find in the records not written by people who dislike her, has spent 5 years making sure not a single child in this pack went hungry. A pause. Someone whose outside and inside have been judged by entirely different standards. I find that interesting. Juno looked away before he could read her face. "It doesn't matter to me," she said, "whether people see it." "I know," he said. "That's also interesting." They sat in the garden again 2 days later, the evening gone cold, the year beginning to remember what it would become. He was quiet for a while. Then he reached across and took her hand. "I've been up late going through everything," he said. "Every report, every account from every healer who attended to me." He paused. "I need to ask you something." She waited. "Was I kind to you?" he asked. "Before I became sick, was I good to you?" His voice was low and entirely serious. "Because if I wasn't, if I haven't been worthy of you, then I need to know that before I stand in that council hall." The question broke something open in her chest that she had been keeping carefully sealed. She could not tell him. She could not say, "You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Your love was the reason I survived 5 years of this pack's hatred. I walked 3 days to a mountain and scrubbed a cave floor for a month to bring you back." She could not say any of it, because the price was both their lives. She wiped the corners of her eyes quickly. "My job," she said, "is to stand by your side, whatever that required." It was the truest thing she could say without saying everything. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and drew her up from the bench and pulled her into him, with the certainty of someone who does not remember why they are doing something and is doing it anyway, because some knowledge lives below memory in the place where the self knows what it needs before the mind has finished thinking. She pressed her face against his shoulder. "I don't remember," he said into her hair, "but tomorrow I will stand in front of that council and fight for you. And when it's settled," his arms tightened, "I intend to spend whatever time I have left learning you again, if you'll let me." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Outside, the pack slept. In the morning, Juno dressed in her finest gown. She chose the red gown, not because it was the most expensive, though it was. Not because it was the most dramatic, though it was that too. Deep crimson with a collar that sat high and proud against her throat, the kind of gown that entered a room before the woman wearing it did. She chose it because red was the color she had worn on the day she first sat beside Kaelin at the Alpha's table, the day the pack had looked at her and formed every opinion they still held. She had worn red then without apology, and she would wear it now without apology. And if this was to be the last morning, she stood in this room fastening the buttons of something beautiful, then it would at least be this. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. Then she turned and walked out. The council hall was full. Not just the council. Word had spread through the pack the way significant words always spread, carried on the specific current of collective anticipation that moves through a community when something has been building for a long time and is finally about to break. Pack members lined the walls, standing 3 deep in places. Servants had found reasons to be in the corridor outside the open doors. Even children had been brought, held at their parents' sides, wide-eyed and quiet in the way children go quiet when adults around them are charged with something large. Juno walked in and took her place. She did not look at the floor. She did not pull her gown tighter or touch her collar or perform any of the small physical apologies that people make with their bodies when they have decided in advance that a room's judgment is correct. She stood the way she always stood, straight, unhurried, wearing what she wore, and looked at the council table. Rowan was at his seat. He looked at her, and in his face was everything he could not say. The weight of a month's worth of kept silence, the knowledge of what she had done and what it had cost her, the expression of a man who has had to watch someone be accused of a thing he knows to be the opposite of true and has been unable to speak. He held her gaze for just a moment. Then he looked down at the table. The rest of the council looked at her the way they always had, with the specific combination of disdain and satisfaction that comes when people who have always believed something are finally in a room where that belief is about to be made official. Edric sat with his hands folded and the composure of a man who has already written the ending and is waiting for the performance to catch up. Then Kaelin walked in. He carried something under his arm, a bound collection of documents, dense with record and notation, the kind of reading that takes not hours but days. He had clearly not slept. There were shadows beneath his eyes that had not been there yesterday, and his jaw held the set of someone who has been working through something difficult and has arrived at last at the other side of it. He sat. He looked at Juno, just briefly, just enough, and something passed between them that was not quite a word and not quite a gesture, but was understood by both of them completely. Then he looked at the council. "You've asked for my decision," he said. Edric leaned forward. "The pact demands justice, my Lord Alpha. The evidence is clear. The Luna abandoned." "I've read the evidence," Kaelin said. His voice was quiet. It always was when he was most certain, the volume of a man who has never needed to raise it to be heard. He set the documents on the table. "I have read," he said, "every report filed by every healer who attended me during my illness. I have read 12 months of supply records. I have read correspondence between this hall and the Merchants' Guild of the neighboring territory. I have read accounts from the Pack's grainkeeper, from the children's healer, from 3 separate village elders." He paused. "I have read everything that was not written by members of this council, because I find I trust those accounts more." Edric's composure thinned slightly. "My lord, the healer's report," Kaelin continued, "states that after 1 year of treatment, they informed the Luna that they had exhausted every available option, that there was nothing further medicine could do." He looked at the council. "This is documented, signed, filed in this hall." He let the silence sit for a moment. The Luna disappeared 3 days after receiving this information. The hall was very quiet. "I want to ask this council something," Kaelin said, "and I want a genuine answer." He looked down the table at each of them in turn. When the healers said there was nothing left to try, "What did you do?" No one spoke. "What additional measure did any of you take to find a cure for your Alpha?" He waited. "Because I have read your reports as well. I have read what each of you did in the 12 months of my illness." He looked at Edric. "You drafted succession documents, which is your duty, and I don't fault you for it." He looked at the next man. "You sent to the Eastern Territories for a specialist, one who stayed 4 days." He continued down the table. "I find no record of any member of this council taking an action that the healers had not already suggested. No additional search, no alternative pursued." He set his hands flat on the documents before him. "And yet, when a woman disappeared 3 days after the healers said they were finished, a woman who then reappeared at the same time her mate made an unexplained recovery, this council's immediate conclusion was abandonment." The hall was absolutely still. "I want to ask you something else," Kaelin said. "What if her disappearance was the reason for my recovery?" The silence broke into murmuring, not the council, but the people along the walls who had come expecting a sentencing and were finding something else entirely. "What extra mile?" Kaelin said. his voice carrying now without effort into every corner of the hall. "Did any of you go to ensure your alpha survived? Aside from blaming his mate, Edric's composure had gone the way of things that can only hold their shape under limited pressure. My Lord Alpha, with respect, you are clearly still under the influence of. If you finish that sentence," Kalen said very quietly, "I will ask you to leave this hall." Edric closed his mouth. Kalen stood. "I have read about my Luna," he said. "Not what this council has told me about her. Not what the market gossip has produced. I have read what she actually did, in records that exist in this hall, filed and sealed, that no one appears to have consulted before reaching their conclusions about her character." He looked at the room. "This is not a record of someone who takes. This is the record of someone who has been giving, quietly, without recognition for 5 years. He picked up the documents. "I will not sentence my Luna to death," he said, "because the woman I have read about is not a woman who abandons what she loves. And because I believe, I am increasingly certain that she went somewhere she was not supposed to go, and did something she was not supposed to do, and came back without telling anyone about it, because that is exactly what this record describes." He looked at Juno, a woman who does the right thing and does not wait for applause. The council began to protest simultaneously, voices rising, chairs shifting, the particular sound of people who have built a case and watched it be disassembled, and are not yet willing to accept the rubble. And then the doors opened. The woman who walked in was simply dressed. No cloak, no adornment, a plain dark dress and her face unguarded, which was the most startling thing about her, to anyone who had ever seen what she was capable of. She walked through the council hall the way she walked through her cave, with the unhurried certainty of someone who has decided a thing and is moving through the steps required to do it. Juno went very still. Sable's eyes found hers across the hall. Something passed between them. Not warmth exactly, but its arrival. The first real warmth arriving late, after a long journey. Then Sable turned to face Kalen and bowed. It was a genuine bow, not the performed courtesy of a subject before authority, but the bow of someone acknowledging something they have tested and found real. "My Lord Alpha," she said, "my name is Sable. I am responsible for your illness." The hall erupted. Kalen raised one hand, the sound died. He looked at Sable with the attention he gave to things that mattered. "Explain," he said. Sable stood straight. "I inflicted you with a rare curse," she said, and her voice carried the same quality it held in the cave, even, unhurried, built for accuracy rather than effect. "Not for hatred of you. I did it because I needed to know something." She paused. "I needed to know how far your mate would go to save you, and I needed to know whether true love still existed in this world." Her eyes moved briefly to Juno. "I had reason to doubt it." The hall was utterly silent. "I watched your Luna," Sable continued. "I watched her sit beside you for a year. I watched this council watch her do it and find ways to call it insufficient. I watched your pack decide she was cold and wasteful and wrong, while she arranged their food supply and their children's medicine, and never once asked to be thanked for it." Her voice did not rise, but something in it sharpened. "I watched all of this, and I thought perhaps the love between you two was simply performance. Perhaps she stayed because it was convenient. Perhaps if the convenience were removed, she would show what she truly was." She let the silence sit. "So I sent the healers out of options," she said, "and I waited to see what she would do." Juno was looking at the floor. She was aware of every person in the room looking at her, and she was holding herself very still, the way she had learned to hold still inside storms. "She came to me," Sable said, 3 days on foot, to a place her pack's law considers forbidden, with a bleeding heel and no demand for comfort." She paused. "The first thing she asked me, before she asked about terms, before she asked about cost, was whether I could save him." Kalen was very still. "I made her serve me for a month," Sable said. "I stripped everything from her that she was accustomed to. I tried, more than once, to provoke her into using her position against me. She never did." Something that might, in better light, have been called respect moved across her face. "I told her the price I wanted. I told her I would take your memory of her, every good thing you knew about her, every moment that built your love, and leave only what this council had put in your mind. Her eyes moved to Kaylin. I told her that if your love was real, it would survive even that, and if it wasn't, she would have her answer. The hall was completely silent. She agreed, Sybil said, without hesitation, because she said that if the love between you was real, it would find its way back. Kaylin closed his eyes, just for a moment, just long enough. I came here today, Sybil said, because I have my answer. She looked at him with the expression of someone handing over something they have been holding for a very long time. You did not remember her. You had every reason this council gave you to condemn her. And you spent your nights reading reports, and you stood up in this hall and fought for her anyway. Her voice, for the first time, changed its register, became something quieter, something that cost more. I came here to tell you that you pass, both of you. She turned and looked at the council. The shift in her expression was not dramatic. It did not need to be. It was simply the shift from testimony to verdict, and everyone in the room felt it. You have judged your Luna, she said, because of how she chose to dress, because she carried herself with pride, because her gowns were expensive and her presence was not soft, and her love for your Alpha was not performed in ways you could witness and measure and approve. She looked at each of them in turn. You have sat in this hall for 5 years and watched a woman work, quietly, without recognition, without asking for it, and you built your entire judgment of her on her appearance. She paused. You have a word for that. I imagine you know it. No one on the council spoke. Character, Sybil said, is not what you wear. It is what you do when no one is watching. And your Luna has been doing it for 5 years while you were busy watching the wrong things. She looked at Edric. You are lucky to have her. I would think carefully about whether your behavior has been worthy of that luck. She turned back to Juno, and she bowed. Not the bow she had given Kaylin, different from that. Deeper. The bow of one woman to another, across everything that had passed between them, across the cave and the fire, and the month of stripped-back endurance and the test that should not have had to be a test at all. You were right, Sybil said quietly, about love, about him. Something in her face shifted, the door that had been painted shut, moving fully on its hinges at last. I am glad to have been wrong. She looked at Juno for one more moment. Then she turned and walked out of the hall the way she had entered, unhurried, undecorated, carrying nothing that didn't belong to her. The hall remained silent long after the sound of her footsteps had faded. It was Rowan who stood first. He pushed back from the council table and rose to his full height, and every eye in the room turned toward him, and he looked at Juno across the distance of the hall, with the expression of a man finally setting down something he has carried too long. I told her about the witch, he said. His voice was steady and loud enough for every corner of the room. I told her because I believed the Alpha was dying and I had run out of options, and I told her because, he stopped, steadied himself, because I thought she wouldn't go. I believed she would weigh the cost against her own comfort and find reasons not to. He paused. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about her in most of the ways a person can be wrong about someone. The hall was listening. She told me before she left, Rowan said, that she didn't want anyone to know. Not the pack, not the Alpha, if he recovered. She said that if he knew what she had sacrificed, he would carry the guilt of it into every decision he made for the rest of his life, and she wouldn't do that to him. He looked at Kaylin. She asked me to let the pack believe what they chose to believe, because the Alpha's ability to lead freely mattered more to her than her own reputation. Something moved through the room, not sound, not movement, but the particular atmospheric shift that happens when a group of people realizes, collectively, that they have been wrong, and then others began to stand. The grainkeeper, a quiet man named Aldous, who had never spoken at a council session in 15 years of attendance, stood up near the back wall and said, in a voice that was unused to carrying, "She came to me every month, early, before anyone was awake, to go through the numbers herself." He looked at the council with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for the right moment. She renegotiated our supply contracts 3 times in 2 years. We have not run short since she came here. I should have said this sooner. The children's healer stood, then one of the village elders, then a woman Juno recognized as a market vendor, who had seen her pass through and been silent, who stood now with the particular urgency of someone correcting a mistake before it becomes permanent. One by one, they came forward, account after account, each one a piece of the thing Juno had done quietly, without audience, without asking anyone to notice. The hall filled with it. 3 years of unremarked work, assembling itself in public for the first time, becoming visible at last. The council sat in the particular silence of people who have been certain, and have had their certainty taken apart in front of witnesses. Edric looked at the table. He did not speak for a long time. Then slowly, with the stiffness of a man doing something his body is not accustomed to, he rose. He looked at Juno, and he inclined his head. It was not an eloquent gesture. It did not try to be. It was simply a man acknowledging that he had been wrong, which is one of the most difficult things a person who has been publicly certain can do. The others followed. One by one, around the table, they rose. Juno stood and watched them and said nothing. She received it the way she received everything, without performance, without visible satisfaction, with the quiet steadiness of someone who had never needed it and was finding, now that it had arrived, that it changed less than she might once have imagined. The news reached the market by noon. She heard it later, how it moved through the stalls and the streets, and the spaces between houses where people gathered, how it changed as it moved the way all news changes, picking up detail and losing accuracy and gaining, in exchange, the specific emotional charge that comes when a community realizes it has done something that cannot be undone and must now decide what to do with that knowledge. By mid-afternoon they came. Not all at once, in ones and twos, and then small groups, and then something that was almost a procession, filtering into the packed grounds and standings in the open space before the hall, with the collective expression of people who have arrived at a door they are not sure they have the right to knock on. Some brought things, bread, wrapped in cloth, flowers from gardens and from market stalls, small things offered with hands that didn't quite know how to hold them. A woman Juno recognized as Sarah, the baker's wife who had screamed at her from the market road, stood at the edge of the group holding a loaf with both hands, not speaking, just standing, which was its own kind of language. Juno walked out to them. She stood in the afternoon light in her red gown and looked at the people who had thrown stones at her back 6 weeks ago, and she looked at them without anger and without the performance of forgiveness, which is its own kind of cruelty, the forgiveness that makes the forgiven feel worse rather than better. She simply looked at them. "I forgive you," she said, not loudly, not for the hall behind her or for any record being kept, just for them. "I forgave you before I left." The woman nearest her, young someone Juno didn't recognize by name, began to cry quietly. It started with her and spread, the way things spread in crowds, not because people are performing grief, but because sometimes a room, or a street, or a square full of people reaches the same feeling at the same moment, and there is nowhere for it to go except out. "I want to say something to you," Juno said when the quiet had settled enough to hold words, "not to correct you, not to shame you." She looked at them steadily. "The way I dress, my gowns, my silk, the way I carry myself, that is what I love. It is the first language I learned, and I will not be ashamed out of it." She paused. "But it is not who I am, and I want to ask you, not for my sake, but for your own, for the sake of how you will treat the next person who stands before you differently. Never again judge someone by what they wear. Judge them by what they do, by what they carry inside." She looked at the bread in Sarah's hands and at Sarah's face, and by how they love the things they have been given to love. Sarah pressed her lips together, nodded. Juno looked at them all for one more moment. Then she turned and went back inside. He found her in the garden as the last light was leaving the sky. He always found her in the garden, even now, even without knowing why. She was sitting on the stone bench, her red gown vivid against the pale stone, looking at the place where the evening sky met the tops of the trees at the garden's far edge. She heard him come and did not turn. He sat beside her. For a while neither of them spoke. The garden held the particular quiet of early evening. Birds settling, wind dropping, the day releasing itself into something softer. Then his memory came back. She knew the moment it happened. Felt it the way she had felt his healing on the mountain path, as something that shifted in the air between them. He made a small sound beside her, barely audible. The sound of someone who has been handed back something they didn't realize was missing until it returned. She heard him breathe. She turned to look at him. His eyes, when he met hers, were full. "The garden," he said. His voice was unsteady in a way she had never heard it. "The first time we sat here, you were wearing blue. I told you the council would never accept a Luna who dressed like a sunset, and you told me the council's opinions were irrelevant to your wardrobe." He swallowed. "I laughed for the first time in months that day." Juno pressed her lips together. He shook his head, and the motion was somewhere between disbelief and something far more tender. "I sat in that council hall and fought for a woman I couldn't remember, and every argument I made." He stopped. "Every argument was something I had already known." "Yes," she said softly. 3 days, he said. 3 days on foot, with a bleeding heel. His jaw worked. "Juno," she said, "I need to, Kaylin." She turned to face him fully. "You passed. That's what matters. Not what I did, what you did, without your memory, without any reason anyone had given you to believe in me." She looked at him. "You found your way back." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached for her, and she let his arms come around her in the dark garden under the rising moon, and she pressed her face against his shoulder the way she had the night before the judgment. Except that now his arms remembered her weight, and she felt the difference. "I told Sable," she said into his shoulder, "that if your love was real, it would survive losing every reason to feel it." She paused. You were right," he agreed. His voice was rough. "You are frequently right, and I intend to be far more annoying about acknowledging it going forward." She laughed, the same laugh as in the garden 3 days ago, sudden and genuine, and felt him pull her closer at the sound of it. "I'm glad," he said quietly, when the laugh had settled, "that even without my memory, I made the right choice. That whatever lives in me, past the point where memory reaches, it knew you." He drew back just enough to look at her. "It knew you were worth fighting for. I was never wrong," she said, "to fight for you either." He looked at her red gown in the moonlight, at the face she had never once apologized for, at the woman who had dressed like a Luna because she was one and had known it long before the pack was ready to. "No," he said, "you weren't." He kissed her under the moonlight, slow, certain, full of everything that memory restores, and everything that had survived without it. The garden was dark around them, and the pack was somewhere beyond its walls, changed by a day that had broken something open. And none of it was perfect, and none of it would be simple going forward, and neither of them needed it to be. They had already proven they knew how to find each other in the dark. If this story moved you, if Juno's quiet courage stayed with you after the last chapter, leave a comment below and tell me the moment that broke you open. I read every single one. And if you want to be here for the next story, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you there.